Hello and welcome to the Medical Affairs Dialogues. In this episode, we are going to explore how medical affairs is changing, moving from a strategic supporting role to leading the way in healthcare. We will talk about what are the factors that drive this change, the skills and the tools required, and what will the future look like. I just cannot wait anymore. Let's jump in. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome our guest today. Our guest for this episode is Shauna Aherne. Welcome to the episode, Shauna.
Thank you, Bertati. I'm so happy to be here with you and excited to dive in today.
Absolutely. Before we go further, I want to introduce you to my audience first. Shauna is an experienced leader in medical affairs and commercialization, currently driving global growth strategy at Open Health. She specializes in guiding pharmaceutical and biotech organizations through critical clinical and commercial decisions. Her work focuses on transforming complex scientific insights into clear strategies, positioning medical affairs as the key driver of high quality decision making. Welcome to the show again, Shauna. I am so glad that you are a part of this episode today. I know we have been talking about this conversation, this episode.
For forever, it feels like. For too long. I'm so excited we're getting to do this finally.
Yes, and I can't wait to ask you all the questions that I've kind of curated for you.
Sure. Yep. We can
Our,
absolutely dive in.
yeah, our topic for today is from playing catch up to setting the pace, redefining medical affairs for what's next. Shauna, before we go any further, I want to open the stage for you. Please
Sure.
connect with my audience and share your
Absolutely.
career journey, the challenges you faced. How did you navigate through those? Let us see the person you are behind that big career.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think you've had some esteemed guests on your podcast, and many of them with extensive resumes and CVs. My goal today is just to be honestly candid and get to have this conversation with you to talk about, what I really think is part of the amazement of what you're building with the podcast, but also with medical affairs solutions, because I really think it's exactly the thing that our industry needs right now, which is more practitioners creating spaces to push conversations forward, not just report on them. So I'm really, really glad to be here to be able to have this with you. So I hate giving the whole like I did this and then I did that. I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version, so to speak. I think the best way to put it is that I've really spent my career at the intersection of where science and commercialization meet, right? Which I know sounds clean, but it's actually where most of the friction lives. I started out on the agency and consulting side. I've moved into enterprise growth strategy. And now, as an individual, both leading a growth function for a global health science organization, I'm really able to see and take on all my experiences. That it just means that I've had a front row seat and continue to get the opportunity to have a front row seat on how dozens and dozens of pharma and biotech companies from, the top 10, to pre-launch really are able to try to turn that clinical innovation that is so instrumental ultimately into real impact and
Yeah.
patient impact in the market. So, the last thing I think I'll say, and then I really think it's let's get to the meat of it all, is there is a pattern that I think we keep seeing. And I know, Bertati, that you see this too, I'm sure, from your work within medical affair organizations, and that it's not the science that's the bottleneck that we often see. It's when that science doesn't translate into that next layer, which is the ability to take rigorous evidence and turn it into those confident decisions by the people who actually determine whether a treatment reaches patients payers, HCPs, commercial teams. These are all what they're trying to do. And that gap between evidence and confident action is where I believe that medical affairs is the most under leveraged in terms of the strategic function in pharma today. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to, getting into in terms of the driver's seat and what that really means.
Amazing. Yes, that's exactly like the mutual feeling here. I just want to touch upon this aspect. Like you said, I have been a pediatric oncology scientist in the beginning of my career, and
Mm-hmm.
I thought I'm going to change the world for the patients.
Yeah.
And transformative medicine is great,
Yeah.
but very soon, working with the patients closely at the Cancer Institute of New Jersey, I
Mm-hmm.
realized that this is great, but like you said, there is no prominent voice, which advocates the science and the business together. There's a
Mm-hmm.
big bridge that
Yeah.
needs to be built. And I think people like you and me, we have realized early in our career, and that's why we are trying to build, and that's why we moved on from the commercial space, from R&D to commercial to medical affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are trying to build that bridge. So
Yeah.
cannot agree with you more. And
Yeah.
I'm so glad that our careers have found the same kind of path, because we found the same unmet need
Yeah.
individually, and
Yeah.
now we are kind of aligning and partnering and voicing the same thing
Yeah.
in our own space. So
Yeah.
thank you for such an eye opening and a kind of a rock star performance already.
Oh,
And I can't, like I said, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you
sure.
today.
Yeah.
And I want to open the discussion and align on a vision today. And
Yeah.
hence this first question.
Yeah.
Medical affairs is increasingly expected to move beyond support and take
Mm-hmm.
a leading role in shaping scientific and clinical strategy. You have
Mm-hmm.
seen it, I am seeing it. So, my
Mm-hmm.
first question, and the pivotal one first, what does it truly mean for medical affairs to set the pace in
Mm-hmm.
today's healthcare ecosystem? Start with this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think when people hear set the pace, they automatically think innovation, in terms of being the first to adopt a new technology or have a flashy new digital, MSL platform, or, maybe something that's helping, evolve content, which are, listen, very important components. But what it means in medical affairs is that the function is able to shape the decision environment, right? Before those decisions ultimately get made, right? So not that it's that one reacts after the commercial strategy is already ready or after the payers have already informed their evidence expectations. It means that medical affairs is helping to ensure that the plan and what it is that we will need to have from an evidence and a science standpoint to help make those informed decisions at the point of care one day are earlier strategic pillars. And that is where I really think the setting that tone and setting that pace for not, oh, launch will be in several, years or whatever it might be. We'll worry about that then. But these are all things that we really need to think about now. And I can draw some contrast and talk about some things, but I thought I'd pause and see what your thoughts were.
Absolutely, so much agreed. And um, I think that's where the discussion starts, and
Mm-hmm.
somewhere we then kind of lose the way, and we are not able to talk about the bottlenecks. We are not able to funnel it out what
Yeah.
the way should be next. So that brings me to my next question.
Okay.
And over the past decade, medical affairs has shifted from a reactive function to more of a strategic one. And you are
Mm-hmm.
experiencing that. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing that. And I think in the future role that we are redefining it even more. The
Yeah.
challenge is even more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you have seen the last decade. And I want to ask you, how has the role of medical affairs evolved in the past decade? And where are we heading now? and
Sure.
and I'll tell you,
Yeah.
I'll tell you why I'm asking this question. Because
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
we unlock, it is very important to set the stage by saying, or by talking about what have we experienced in the past decade? And what are
Yeah,
we trying to redefine? What are we trying to kind of reinvent? And my questions will follow up into
yeah,
reinvention later as well. So I want you to answer that and set the stage for our further conversation.
sure. So I mean, I will say the question of and the idea behind, how medical affairs has evolved. I mean, it's not that it is just evolved, it should always be evolving, right? And I
Absolutely.
think that there's some, I mean, listen, every organization, I don't care what industry you're in or what you're doing, change is not easy. And as human nature, we often kind of do the same thing we're used to doing, and that's just part of the way what we're built. But I think the aspect of medical affairs by virtue of, and I've worked on the commercial side post Sunshine Act and got to see kind of what that looked like, and as the as the unmet needs started to get kind of smaller in certain therapeutic areas,
Mhm.
and therefore the ability and the need for earlier strategic scientific understanding from a strategic lens, not just a clinical development lens, is really where a lot of that started. And that was, gosh, 10 years or so ago when I think a lot of that started taking shape. But I think what we also see a lot of times is that the setting the pace or the playing catch up often looks like the publication plan is perhaps built on what commercial may have already decided to prioritize, or payer
Mhm.
evidence gaps surface at launch and then everyone scrambles. I've been in
Wow.
more conversations where I wish I had the evidence to say, or ad boards are convened to validate decisions that may have already been made. So if we think back to setting the pace or where it's evolved from, it really is about, being able to stop just being and thinking about what we need to do, but being the architect, a decision architect in an earlier stage. And I had a conversation actually yesterday with a good friend of mine who is at a smaller phase one organization, and he leads medical affairs, and he's consistently having to demonstrate or communicate why early medical affairs and what that really means, from the idea behind needing to break down patterns, make sure that we're really engaging with our customers. And yeah, I'll say customers because whether it's the HCP, the patient, or the payer, that's where medical affairs needs to continue to think about in terms of where their role and their value from an intersection plays.
So true, so true. And like you said, medical affairs, and this is truly the case, medical affairs is so cross functional, and medical
Mm-hmm.
affairs has multiple key stakeholders across, and that's where the challenge comes in. It's easier for
Yeah.
R&D, it's easier for commercial, and I've been on those verticals. So I
Yep.
I'm telling you from experience, and you know it too. You've been on the commercial side. Medical affairs is so
Yeah.
uniquely positioned if it's used into its benefit, but
Yeah.
uniquely challenging role as well. And
Yeah.
I totally hear you when your colleague, your friend said that they have to prove every time why medical affairs has to be brought in early on.
Yeah.
And we
Mm-hmm.
have been harping on it for so long
Yeah.
that please bring in when when the asset is in phase
Yeah.
2,
Yeah.
phase 2B.
Well,
Please do
yeah,
not
I mean,
wait longer.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to make that change
Yeah.
when I was working for a big CRO. And
Mm-hmm.
I was very, very uniquely positioned by the leadership team, and I was able to bring that change because of that. But
Yep.
this effort never seems to change. We have to always, on the medical affairs side, prove for small mid-tiered companies, pharma companies, like what's the need of coming in early at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know, but we have to prove it, and that bothers
Well, I
bothers me.
yeah, well, I think it's also a combination of being able to think about identity shifts, right? So if you think about it from the standpoint of coming from being, medical affairs, from being a gatekeeper to a
Mhm.
translator, right? So as a function, and I'll use a very layman's kind of example, but it was essentially a function that was built to protect the science from what I'll call commercial impulse, right? So as a protector and an integrity, maintainer from the evidence and the science standpoint, it's been very necessary, and it maintains to be very necessary. But
Mhm.
evolving the role is really about translating into language and frameworks that both payers, HCPs, and then the commercial teams can actually act on with that confidence. So if I was going to think about the three shifts, like if I'm, thinking about it, it's one is, being moving from a gatekeeper to a translator. I think the other is shifting from a siloed function to a connective tissue, right?
Absolutely.
Organizations that I think are getting it right don't treat medical affairs as a standalone pillar. And I'm not saying anything that anyone hasn't heard before, to be honest, when it comes to this, but it's kind of about the organization. It's kind of like if you embody as an entity of it's important and what that will mean, R&D trusts the science, commercial trusts the strategic thinking, access trusts the scientific rigor, but in no other instance is there any other function that is essentially the trifecta of all of those three things, which is what medical affairs is, right? From a science, from
Absolutely.
a strategic thinking, from an evidence rigor. And then, thirdly, is the evidence generation into evidence strategy. I've had other conversations with teams that are also trying to think about how more cost efficiently and effectively they can think about evidence generation in a more strategic way earlier on. I mean, the reality of it is a full integrated evidence generation plan with systematic literature reviews and all of those things in a phase one. Sometimes they'll say, well, it's not really worth it, right? We haven't even
Hmm.
barely gotten scientific, thumbs up, so to speak, to say that from an investment, a business standpoint, that we're going to invest in the next phase two or phase three. So it's like they don't, you don't want to overspend where you don't have to, where the science won't
Absolutely.
prove itself to be a viable. But in all honesty, most organizations are somewhere between shift one of the gatekeeper to translator and maybe shift
Mhm.
two, the connective tissue. But very few have made it to shifting into the third bucket, which is this reason into capability or organizational permission, and being really
No.
the one
Mhm.
that is not that often has the insight but not necessarily the mandate to change.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And that's where you and I and others are going to make that change. I'm hoping, because that's what we want to see later,
Mhm.
um, in our lifetime.
Yeah.
So, to stay relevant in a fast moving healthcare landscape, medical affairs must rethink how it creates impact and influence decisions. And we just spoke about those, right? These decisions.
Mhm.
So, what strategic shifts must medical affairs make to lead rather than follow in the innovation cycle now? Because we are at that pivotal point in our discussion where we spoke about what happened earlier, what needs to change, what we are seeing the needle move slowly. So now is the time to really think about it. If we have to lead more and more and more, by this I mean that more of our partners are finding medical affairs as leaders, as the
Mhm.
supporting partners. If we have to do that in the healthcare landscape, what strategic shifts might happen now?
So uh, it's interesting because it's again, I feel like I'm on a podcast I did 5 years ago in some instances, because listen, I mean, change takes time and every organization is on different change horizons, right? I will say that activity is still the easiest benchmark that
Mm.
companies are using to validate innovation and leadership and leading and impact. I really do go back to what I said at the beginning, that we really need to restructure the way that we think about value and innovation and shift that thinking into decisions. What is it that we need to do to help, at the end of the day, our patients, our HCPs, our payers, our different regulatory bodies make those decisions at the right moment. And
Mm-hmm.
most medical affair teams, they're working towards that. And they can tell you about still how many publications they produced or interactions they had or advisory boards that they ran, but very few can still tell you about the activities that they did that were designed specifically to influence or to inform or to educate, right? I know influence can be always
A
again, coming
negative
from yeah,
connotation.
I mean, I'm coming
Yes.
from that guardianship angle, and I understand that that's an important thing. But at the end of the day, if those key stakeholders or customers don't have the right information to make the right decisions, well, then the patients ultimately suffer, or the impact or the
Absolutely.
outcomes are the ones that suffer. I think
Yes.
when we were at MAPS not too long ago, you and I, right?
Yes.
Susanna Galani
Uh-huh.
she was the keynote, right, at
Yes.
MAPS, and she said something about how the systems that we design to measure and reward performance are what ultimately shape the behaviors, right, that reach patients. And if we're counting on pubs and MSL interactions, that's the behavior you'll get. And if you're measuring whether or not evidence shifted a payer's coverage position, right, or the evidence helped get approval in an earlier line of therapy or change prescribing confidence, if you don't make that as the shift to what we're thinking about in terms of innovation, you're going to get a fundamentally you won't get a fundamentally different organization, is what I'm saying, right?
Mm.
So again, I say, owning the evidence strategy upstream is really where medical affairs isn't always at the table. And when that evidence generation plan is being built and the real world evidence strategy is being thought about, or the health economics agenda, the payer evidence package. I mean, those are downstream executor initiatives, not just strategic leadership opportunities, but co-ownership of that in a phase 2 and onward to launch is really where I think the innovation and the strategic thinking can come back into play.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing that happen for the big organizations, the giants, the pharma giants. But
Yeah, yeah,
the
some are doing
concern
it. Yeah.
is, yes, but the concern is for the mid-tiered pharma companies. They are they are still struggling into finding their way of incorporating medical affairs so early on, and having the medical affairs leadership team have a say, have a seat at the table at that point of those decisions when
Yeah,
they're being made.
I mean, I think, it's a juxtaposition, right? I mean, I will tell you, I see some of the big ones that struggle with this whole thing even still because of the layers. I mean, I will tell you, the larger an organization doesn't mean the easier of this kind of shift or
Mm.
not only from a mindset but from an actual executional standpoint. I mean, there are some organizations that are really focusing on like the clinical impact. They're really focusing on um, those key evidence, those key pieces of impact and decision making, as I like to call it, and doing it well. I mean, at the end of the day, we are also, these are businesses, right? And so if you're thinking about some of the
Mhm.
smaller ones, it's about weighing. I always use a term that anyone that's ever been on one of my teams always jokes about me with, but I use it, the juice worth the squeeze. And I hate to say it in such a simple way, but you have to weigh the business benefit with the outcome benefit or the decision making benefit in these instances. And so I think there is a shift in terms of companies not just hiring the commercial person before the medical person in the smaller ones. I'm seeing it every day. I think part of it is because of the competitiveness, to be honest. Part of it is also because a lot of those biotechs and small companies hope to get acquired. And having a full
Mm.
team, and thinking about the customer engagement and the field model beforehand have become part and parcel for what companies need to have infrastructure built against to demonstrate its essential value. But I think those things are part of where a lot of why earlier medical affairs is happening, even in companies that maybe are not always having that seat at the table. But I'm hopeful I'm seeing a trend towards that type of movement.
Yes, I'm hopeful too. And you spoke about um, guardrails, and you spoke about um, change and decision making. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that digital and data
Mm-hmm.
capabilities. They
Yeah.
are rapidly changing,
Mm-hmm.
and is our ways of capturing insights that are being generated, decisions are being made, stakeholders are getting engaged, so many layered pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
So, how is AI and advanced analytics transforming medical affairs, operations, and capabilities? This is
Yeah.
a very important part in moving the needle,
Yeah.
redefining what needs to change, and we spoke about it. So, that's
Yeah.
why I'm starting with the first kind of layer, first kind of the pillar.
Yeah.
How is AI and advanced analytics transforming medical affairs, operations, and capabilities in your view? So that we can deal with the first aspect and then we move layer by layer, uh, kind of
Yeah.
understanding those more.
Sure. Well, wow, if every day of life is not somehow talking about I don't know what is anymore. Pertati, I know that you've written about this, particularly around agentic AI and the idea that context is the new code, right?
Hmm.
And I think that a framework is exactly right. Where I build on it from there is about what I'm seeing across organizations, in that there's a real gap between what AI can do and what most medical affairs teams are actually ready to use it for. So it's
Hmm.
kind of like, if you build, the whole, like, what is that movie, if you build it they will come. Well, yeah, not necessarily, right? I mean, sure, you can deploy something, but how you actually use it is, the other side of that
That's
coin.
the barrier. That's the invisible barrier.
It
Absolutely
is. It
spot
is.
on.
It is. And so it's like, I know that there's a lot of organizations that have so the reality of data is the also piece to this, right? I mean, there's a lot of information that exists out there. And unfortunately, we cannot consume it all at its vast amounts to see the connection points between medical information and field medical and what we're seeing in real time and real world. There's no way to connect all those pieces. And so AI can really help us to translate that, to be able to say, ooh, we're seeing this. This is a barrier, or this is something we need to flag, and therefore think about strategically to mitigate what either evidence or strategy or communication or engagement that we need to deploy to help pardon me, to be able to help mitigate some of those things. I said, what I think is genuinely working is that there are pockets of very specific use cases where AI is expediting time to.
Yeah.
I think the quality control around that is really important. So, I mean, I'll say AI accelerated literature review as an example, and evidence synthesis. There's the synthesis of the evidence and then what that evidence actually means, which is the translation. That's where you need the human, you need the critical. And I know this whole augmented or human in the loop, it's not about human in the loop. It's about a connective model where you leverage AI to help create the lowest common denominator so that we can apply context to that, right? I think we're real world evidence signal detection is another one. The congresses, I mean, there are no two bigger spends than congresses in field medical in our
Yes.
industry, in all honesty. And they're two of the areas where we just still do a lot of splatter on the walls, right? And being able to understand about our Congress impact and about our engagements and about the competitive intelligence, but they're all very focused on high volume pattern recognition tasks, right? And that's where I think is an area that we are at right now that is improving our ability. But the honest reality is that teams, again, don't have necessarily the data infrastructure to make AI genuinely useful. um, CRM data is still very inconsistent. MSL information is fragmented. Evidence libraries are not necessarily tagged, and so the
Hmm.
bottlenecks of the data is part of the challenge. So again, everyone's trying to solve for it. There's lots of conversations happening about it, but I really think if there are some organizations doing it well, I think we'll still see the curve move forward. We have to have, though, the honest conversation. And there were some honest conversations at MAPS, that
Yes.
too, right?
Mhm.
What was it? Over 1,500 people showed up. And there was more. I think I looked across the sessions and I looked across the different providers, solution providers or strategic partners that were there, as MAPS always likes to call it. And the energy around AI was in almost every session title.
Every session.
But when you got into the rooms, the real question wasn't about the technology in most
Yes.
instances. It was about readiness. Um, it was about, okay, I like this and this is a good idea and I want to be able to do this, but is my data, can I actually do that? Like, are our systems integrated to do that? The loudest signal wasn't that AI is the future. It was, a lot of it was that organizationally we're just not ready for the AI that we already have. I mean, how many people I talk to that have Copilot on their computers or have some, chat GPT, they have something, or even internal organizations that have built their own, Gen AI or
In-house.
AI
Yeah.
systems,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so the real risk isn't about using AI to do more, but it's really just about, it's not, not working, right? It's not just about being faster, but it's about how to really work it. So, I think the start of the question was, how is AI transforming medical affairs? I think we've ebbed and flowed in different parts of the conversation, but the organizations getting AI right, using it to amplify human judgment, not just automate it, are the ones getting it right now. The ones that are getting it wrong are just using it to accelerate activities, and just deploying things without necessarily having their teams ready to actually use it in a real valuable way.
As you were answering, I cannot tell you, I was jumping on my seat because
I
you
know, I
have
can see you. You were like,
you
okay, let's go.
no, because there were so many important aspects that you
Let's talk
were
about it.
touching,
Yeah, go
and
for
these
it.
were pain points. These
Yeah,
are the things that I am facing every day, and these are the
yeah,
things like chokes you, because the reason is in maps we got the opportunity to talk about these in almost every session,
yeah,
and you nailed it. Everywhere what we saw through the polls was, are we ready to accept what we already have? And interestingly enough, the other day I was having recording an episode with a clinical expert from Spain,
okay.
Marina,
Oh,
and
okay.
she said the same thing,
Yeah,
that we do not have to have people or like human in the loop. We
yeah.
have to architecturalize and make
Mhm.
AI the partner to do what we desire, what our
Yeah,
mission is. And
yeah,
you touched upon all of these in the medical affairs as well. Exactly our
yeah,
point. We should
yeah,
not be focusing on how can we make this process better, human in the loop, and
yeah,
how do we move ahead? No, how do we fix the broken systems
yeah,
that we have? And these are huge important aspects of medical affairs that bring the information together.
yeah,
Those pieces have to be used. Like those people, those spaces is where AI needs to be deployed, needs to be stitched in, so that we have a cohesive system. We can
yeah,
cross talk, AI can find the patterns for us,
yeah,
and and kind of fulfill our vision and mission.
yeah,
So well said.
yeah.
I
Oh, thank
cannot
you.
agree with you more. I mean,
Yeah,
these are
and it's,
things that we can talk for hours, I know,
oh
but
yeah, yeah. No, we
but
got a
but
lot to
these are the
cover.
pain points. These are
Yeah,
the things
yeah.
that is
Well, and I
mattering.
think people are still, I think it's human. Again, I go back to, it's psychology at its best, where people look for the quickest fix in certain instances, and technology ultimately often goes to that. But a technology, a SaaS-based platform, a new thing, like that's not going to really be what we need to,
Need.
to drive for the future. Again, I always apply it to context is code, and whatever we can do and deploy that make our people able to use and are able to really use it and help to inform the strategic aspects of again, decision making, like longer term thinking,
Mm-hmm.
even years ahead, that's really where I think it needs to index.
Absolutely. So, with that, we will touch upon the next pillar and
Hmm.
open that box.
Okay.
Cross functional collaboration is critical, and medical affairs stands on that. But I know you will agree with me that
Hmm.
to get the move the needle from a supportive role to a equal strategic partner. I'm
Hmm.
not talking about the Janssen, the Pfizer, the
Hmm.
Novartis, the BMS. I'm talking about smaller pharma companies, mid-tiered pharma companies where this voice is still struggling. The equal strategic partnership is not seen as much. So I want to focus on this aspect a little bit and want to know your perspective. How can medical affairs better position itself as a strategic partner to commercial R&D and market access teams? Talk to us for those teams who are that struggle is real and I
Yeah,
see it with my
yeah,
clients. So talk to
yeah,
us about that. How can medical affairs position better? Like you said, your friend mentioned, right?
yeah, yeah,
He has to explain why medical affairs should come early on, and this
yeah,
struggle is still valid and it's real.
yeah,
Having We are vouching for it. I remember Robin say, Kirk say, we
yeah,
want to be the third strategic pillar, the equal
yeah,
partner. And now the
yeah,
vision is, I was talking to Kirk recently and he said, I want to see medical affairs as the orchestrator. And I'm like, yes, there are some populations who are still struggling to have that equal foot. What do
yeah,
we tell them now?
yeah. Well, I sometimes say things like, well, you got to stop asking for it and do it. I hate to say it like that, but I also think that I'll be direct. I think the reason that medical affairs struggles to be seen as a strategic partner isn't usually on capability, but that's really where a lot of times we index, right? And it's always indexing on the capabilities we have. It needs to move and not just accept the supporting role in the process, but be a part of co-leading. And frankly, other functions are happy to let it happen that way. And if you go along with that and you don't necessarily demonstrate that your voice is contributory to, I go back to those decisions and what it is that we need to ultimately do to help support the longer term decisions. We won't get that strategic seat, and strategic partnership will just be seen and continue to be seen as the function that has great capabilities to execute on the plans that ultimately are being laid by others. And so when you're planning together, you're a partner, right? Like if we sat down and we said, okay, let's make plans to go out, or plans for this podcast, right? Like you and I sat down and we talked about what we wanted to talk about. We're in a partnership together. If it was something that you sent to me and you said, hey Shauna, let's do this, and I didn't really plan with you, you wouldn't see me as a partner. You'd just see me maybe as more of a piece in the overall plan that you had, rather than being someone that's there to support everyone that might be listening, and hopefully sharing pearls of wisdom that can help them. But I think that that's a lot of a big part of it. Partnership, um it isn't a relationship, necessarily. It's a shared operating model. It's, if you're presenting to your commercial counterpart, you're a vendor. Like if you're just presenting to them, but if you're planning with them, then you're a partner with them.
Mhm.
And so that's where I think a lot of the pieces of planning that medical affairs isn't always included in or a part of, is where some of that gets lost in translation. The other thing I'll say, just, I always, going back to maps, I was able to run a debate session on omni-channel, funny enough. And one of the first things I actually said was stop calling it omni-channel, because I think that part of it is that we've just become numb to certain buzzwords. But sitting on stage with leaders from AstraZeneca and Lilly, the moment that I think landed hardest was when we stopped talking about channels and we started talking about decisions, right? Who's making this what decision? What evidence do they need? And where are we showing up in the right moments? And I think that's when the walls between medical, commercial access really start to dissolve, because everyone's working backward from that same stakeholder decision point to where they are today.
So true. And I was part of that debate. I attended it and um, absolutely agree with you on that. Um, yeah. So I'm getting tempted to ask this question.
Go for it.
Traditional traditional engagement models are evolving, requiring more meaningful, personalized, and insight-driven interactions. So
Mhm.
I want to highlight here the HCP engagement, another
Okay.
big pillar.
Mm-hmm.
What are the best practices for engaging HCPs in a more meaningful and scientifically valuable way? I don't intend to ask you what everybody is saying already or what is already available. We have spoken about it
Yeah,
and it's
yeah, yeah.
available all the time. What
Yeah.
I want to know,
Mm.
what have you gathered from your personalized experience of big
Mhm.
pharma giants, working with big giants and working with nimble startups? What are the best practices that you are seeing for engaging with HCPs in a meaningful way in our today's time, with social media being so prominent, AI being so like on our face, hyped, and HCPs are getting educated about the AI tools that are available. So, in this kind of
Mhm.
changing situations, how what are the best practices?
So, best practices is always a tough term because I think that it's there are good foundational pillars that we need to think about, but best practice is a little hard because it's the problem isn't that people don't know what good looks like, because I think they do,
Mhm.
right?
They
So I
do.
think people
Mhm.
know, like, oh, this is a best practice. I think the problem is that most engagement models are built for reach, right? Like volume, and not really based on influence, or based on being very prescriptive or precise or prioritizing, based on life cycle where they are. So I know we got a lot some other things to cover, so I won't belabor the point, but the reality of it is that I've been saying for years about diversifying your KOL base, right? I mean, finally, I think that there's a real understanding that the community physicians, right, are really the ones, that community physicians, the formulary committees, the clinical champions and health systems. I mean, those are the HCPs where, if we aren't engaging with those that are making decisions around where those things matter most, we're losing out. And those
Mhm.
are things that have to be earlier than they've ever been before. And MSL teams alone can't be everywhere. So I think that um we really need to think about how, again, like I said, can't be everywhere. It's not about how do we engage more. It's about, are we engaging the right people with the right evidence at the right moment. I mean, it's not some thing that hasn't been said a million times, but I still think that with the right evidence, and that goes back to the planning earlier, that is really one of the things I think we need to be thinking about for quote unquote best practice.
Beautiful, beautiful. Um, as the function evolves, new skills, capabilities, and mindsets are needed. And like I said, this is a complex environment. So touch upon the skills and the mindsets that will define the next generation of medical affairs leaders. Because we've spoken about what the last decade was, where
Yep.
the needle is moving, what is the unmet need now, and what we are dealing with. Now, we should talk about what are the skills and mindsets that will be required for tomorrow's leaders
Sure.
or rising leaders.
Sure. I will say it succinctly, and if most people that know me know that I am a woman of many words, so I will say it just in one sentence, that I think the skill sets and mindsets, the hardest skill is going to be the willingness to stop doing the things that make you feel productive, but are not consequential, right? And that's what I think will define those, right? If you stop on volume and you focus on what really matters, that will be the leading indicator.
Beautiful. Succinct it was, but very powerful. Very powerful, Shauna.
Thank you.
So I know that this podcast has to end because you have commitments and
All
I want
good
to
things
respect
have to
your
come to an
time.
end, Bertati.
Absolutely. I respect your time. So this is my last question. Reimagining the function, if you could, from the first principles, can help challenge legacy structures, right? And unlock new ways of creating value. We both believe that. So, if you could redesign medical affairs from scratch, what would you keep? What would you change? And what would you eliminate? And why?
Oh, that's a great question. So, oh, okay. You're gonna, of course, you end with the toughest. So I would keep scientific rigor. I think the ethical commitment that medical affairs also has is so important to differentiating it and making it such a critical piece of the three kind of part framework I had talked about.
Mhm.
It's a non-negotiable. It's what allows us to maintain that confidence and trust in the decision making and in what that comes to physicians and patients and payers in terms of making those decisions. I think MSLs, I think when they're properly equipped and directed, are one of the most valuable intelligence assets that pharma has. I would change. Let me think. What would I change? I would change the evidence strategy. I think I've kind of echoed this across the board that it's earlier. It functions from day one. It's not a separate plan that gets harmonized later on. I think it's about one evidence strategy that's co-owned, and that way we can structure it around those decision points. And I would change, stop buying tools. I don't know, start fixing, your data, and start deploying things in the ways that mean most to your people. And I would eliminate, I think I've said this, activity metrics. I think I would eliminate, how much did we do. I think we are evolving to that place. But if we can't answer the things about, did this insight change the development plan, or did this engagement shift the confidence an HCP had, you're not really being able to demonstrate what we need to be able to demonstrate, which is that value. So I think, as clearly and succinctly as I can, those are the things that I would keep, change, and eliminate, if I could redesign medical affairs.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that loud. You won't believe you were not there in the yesterday's MAPS event, the Tri-State
I know. I wanted to
Bridgewater
be there.
event.
I wanted to
I
be there.
know
My
we
friend
we
Sally was
spoke
there. Yeah.
about the metrics change, and
Yeah.
and you said luckily the same thing. We need to stop measuring the activities the
Yeah.
way we have been doing. New variations of really measuring impact is required, and
Yeah.
so happy that you touched upon such important crucial aspects of medical affairs, and how this whole journey has been, how what needs to change, and how we'll move the needle for us and the coming generation of leaders. So beautiful, beautiful
Oh,
conversation.
thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for
Thank
sharing
you.
your wiseness over the years that you've
Oh,
learned,
yeah.
the information, the insights. Thank you, Shauna.
Well, thank you for inviting me to join you. I've both enjoyed developing a friendship with you, and I loved watching how you've grown and the community has grown, and all the things that are covered. So I'm grateful that and hopeful that I imparted a little bit of, like I said, pearls of insight, that I can share for the next generation and those to come. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Cannot thank you enough. Thank you
oh
so
yeah,
much.
you're welcome. Thank you. Well, I will go have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Um, Thank you all for joining us today. You heard our guest. If you think that this episode is valuable for you, there is some more meaning and interesting for you, please take it back home. Talk to your team members, talk to the leadership team in your organization, and let's connect again. Until next time, stay tuned, stay informed, and take strategic decisions.